There comes a moment in life when you have to stop looking outside yourself for the answer and start looking within. Not because circumstances don't matter. They do. Money matters. Opportunities matter. Relationships matter. Where you live matters. What happens around you matters. But here's the part most people miss. None of those things have the final word. Your thinking does. Two people can walk through the same difficult season and come out completely different. One person says, this is the end of the road. Another says, this is where I learn. One sees rejection and decides they're not good enough. Another sees rejection and decides they need to improve. One sees failure as proof that they should quit. Another sees failure as information. Same event. Different interpretation. Different action. Different future. That's why mindset is everything. Now, I'm not talking about pretending everything is wonderful when it isn't. I'm not talking about sitting around saying positive words while doing nothing. That's not mindset. That's wishful thinking. A strong mindset doesn't deny reality. It looks reality straight in the eye and says, all right, this is where I am. Now, what am I going to do about it? That's the beginning of change. You see, your life often follows the direction of your dominant thoughts. If you constantly tell yourself you're incapable, eventually you stop attempting difficult things. If you constantly tell yourself there's no opportunity, you stop looking for opportunity. If you convince yourself that everyone else is responsible for your situation, you surrender the very power that could change it. But when you begin changing the conversation in your mind, something powerful happens. You begin seeing possibilities that were always there. Maybe the opportunity wasn't missing. Maybe your eyes weren't trained to recognize it. Maybe the door wasn't locked. Maybe you had simply convinced yourself that you weren't supposed to not think about how often we make decisions based on beliefs that we never really examined. Someone told you that you're not smart enough. Someone told you that people like you don't succeed. Maybe you failed at something when you were young, and you quietly turned that failure into an identity. Maybe you've made mistakes with money, relationships, business, or your career. And instead of saying, I made a mistake, you started saying, I'm a failure. Be careful with that language. There's a tremendous difference between saying, I failed, and saying, I am a failure. One describes an event. The other creates an identity. And once you accept an identity, you begin behaving according to it. If you think you're disciplined, you'll start acting like a disciplined person. If you believe you're capable of learning, you'll keep going when something gets difficult. If you believe you can improve, criticism becomes useful instead of threatening. Your beliefs influence your behavior, and your repeated behavior eventually creates your results. That's why the first battle isn't always out there. The first battle is in your thinking. You don't need to change your entire life today. You need to change the direction of your thinking today. That's a much more practical goal. Ask yourself, what am I thinking about every morning when I wake up? What am I telling myself when something goes wrong? What do I believe about my future? What do I believe about my ability to learn? What do I believe I deserve? What do I believe is possible for me? Those questions matter because your mind is always giving you instructions. If you say, I can't, your mind begins looking for reasons to stop. If you say, how can I? Your mind begins searching for solutions. That's a completely different mental posture. And here's something else worth remembering. You don't need to feel confident before you begin. Sometimes confidence comes after action, not before it. You take the first step, you learn something, you take another step, and slowly your belief in yourself grows. A person doesn't become strong by constantly telling themselves they're strong. They become strong by doing difficult things. So when your circumstances are difficult, don't waste all your energy asking why life isn't easier. Ask a better question. What kind of person can I become because of this? That question changes everything. Maybe the hardship can teach you patience. Maybe the setback can teach you preparation. Maybe the disappointment can teach you better judgment. Maybe the season of uncertainty can teach you discipline. Maybe the obstacle you've been fighting is actually developing the person you'll need to become for the next level of your life. Your circumstances are not always your choice, but your response can become your responsibility. And once you understand that, you stop waiting for life to become perfect before you begin improving yourself. You start reading. You start learning. You start organizing your days. You start choosing your friends more carefully. You start becoming selective about what enters your mind. You start keeping promises to yourself. And slowly, almost quietly, your life begins to change. Not because the world suddenly became different, because you became different. So don't underestimate the power of one better thought, one better decision, one better response. Your future may not be determined by what happens to you today, but by what you decide today means and what you choose to do next. challenge your thinking, and you change the direction of your life. And once you begin changing the way you think, the next step is to change the way you respond to what happens around you. Because it's one thing to say, I want a better life. It's another thing to accept responsibility for building it. Now, responsibility is not about blaming yourself for everything that has ever happened. Life will hand you things you didn't ask for. You will experience disappointment. People will misunderstand you. Plans will fail. Opportunities will disappear. Sometimes you'll work hard and still lose. That's part of being alive. But here's the difference between a person who remains stuck and a person who moves forward. The person who moves forward keeps asking, what can I do now? That's a powerful question. You may not control what happened yesterday, but you can control what you do today. You may not control another person's attitude, but you can control your response. You may not control the economy, the market, your childhood, somebody else's opinion, or the opportunities you were given, but you can control your preparation, your effort, your habits, your choices, and the attitude you bring to the situation. And when you understand that, you stop giving your power away. It's easy to blame circumstances because blame gives you temporary relief. If someone else is responsible for everything wrong in your life, then you don't have to change anything. You can sit comfortably and explain why you're stuck. But I didn't have the right opportunities. My family didn't support me. My boss doesn't appreciate me. The economy is terrible. Other people had an advantage. Maybe some of those things are true. Maybe some of them really did make your journey harder. But here's the question that matters. Now what? Because knowing why something happened doesn't automatically change what happens next. You can spend 10 years explaining your circumstances, or you can spend 10 years improving your circumstances. And I would rather spend those 10 years learning. I would rather say, all right, this is where I am. What skill am I missing? What decision did I make that I need to reconsider? What habit is holding me back? What can I learn? Who can I learn from? What can I do differently tomorrow? Those questions put you back in the driver's seat. Responsibility is powerful because it gives you something to work with. If you say, my life is entirely somebody else's fault, you've also said, my life is entirely somebody else's responsibility to fix. That's a terrible bargain. But when you say, I have a part in this, you also say, I have the power to influence what happens next. That's freedom, and don't misunderstand me. Taking responsibility doesn't mean pretending you caused every problem. It means refusing to let problems determine your future. Maybe you didn't choose the setback, but you can choose the lesson. Maybe you didn't choose the disappointment, but you can choose the response. Maybe you didn't choose the circumstances, but you can choose your next move. And sometimes the next move is very small. It might be making the phone call you've been avoiding. It might be applying for the opportunity. It might be apologizing. It might be starting the book. It might be saving the money. It might be getting up 30 minutes earlier. It might be admitting, I don't know, and then going out to learn. People often wait for a massive breakthrough when what they really need is a series of small acts of responsibility. You don't rebuild a life in one dramatic afternoon. You rebuild it decision by decision, and that's why excuses are so dangerous. An excuse doesn't just explain your past. Repeat it often enough, it becomes permission to remain exactly where you are. You tell yourself, I'll start when things settle down. But life rarely settles down completely. There will always be another problem, another responsibility, another unexpected expense, another difficult conversation. If you're waiting for perfect conditions, you'll wait forever. Successful people don't necessarily have fewer problems. They simply become better at dealing with them. They develop the habit of saying, this is difficult, but I can learn. This is disappointing, but I can respond wisely. This didn't work, but I can try another way. I made a mistake, but I can correct it. That is the mindset of a person who refuses to surrender control of their future. And here's where responsibility becomes especially important. You have to take responsibility not only for your actions, but also for what you repeatedly allow into your mind. What conversations do you keep having? What influences do you keep accepting? What habits do you keep tolerating? What excuses do you keep repeating? Because eventually what you tolerate becomes part of your life. If you keep telling yourself that you are powerless, you'll behave like someone who is powerless. If you keep telling yourself that you can learn, improve, adapt, and grow, you'll begin behaving like someone who has possibilities. So today, don't ask only, who's responsible for my situation? Ask the better question. What part of this situation is now mine to improve? That's where your power begins. Take responsibility for your choices. Take responsibility for your habits. Take responsibility for your attitude. Take responsibility for your learning. Take responsibility for the direction of your life. You may not be able to control the starting point, but you can influence the next step, and sometimes one responsible step is all it takes to begin changing everything. Stop blaming your circumstances and start building your future. Now, once you take responsibility for your life, you have to take responsibility for what you put into your mind, because your mind doesn't stay empty. It's always being influenced by something. The question is not whether you're being influenced. The question is, by what? Every day, you're receiving information. You hear conversations. You watch videos. You read headlines. You listen to opinions. You spend time with certain people. You repeat certain thoughts. And whether you realize it or not, all of those things are shaping the way you see yourself and the world around you. That's why you have to become careful about what you feed your mind. Think about your body for a moment. If you eat poorly every day, you shouldn't be surprised when your body doesn't perform well. If you never exercise, you shouldn't expect tremendous strength. Your physical condition is influenced by what you repeatedly put into your body and what you repeatedly do with it. Your mind works in a similar way. If you constantly feed it negativity, fear, gossip, excuses, resentment, and distractions, eventually that becomes the atmosphere in which you think. Then you wonder why you're discouraged. You wonder why you're impatient. You wonder why you're always expecting something to go wrong. But what did you give your mind to work with? You can't spend hours consuming negativity and then expect your thinking to be filled with clarity and confidence, so you have to become intentional. That doesn't mean you have to avoid every negative person in the world or pretend bad things don't exist. Life isn't a motivational poster. There are real problems. There are difficult people. There are painful experiences. You need to understand reality. But understanding reality is different from feeding on negativity. You can know about a problem without allowing the problem to occupy your entire mind. You can hear criticism without letting it become your identity. You can recognize difficulty without becoming convinced that difficulty is permanent. And one of the greatest ways to strengthen your mind is through learning. Read something useful. Study something valuable. Listen to someone who has already learned what you're trying to learn. Ask questions. Take notes. Think, deflect. Then apply what you've learned. You don't have to read 50 books this month. You don't need to become an expert overnight. You simply need to become a little wiser than you were yesterday. Imagine what happens if you spend the next year deliberately improving your mind. You learn how money works. You learn how communication works. You learn how relationships work. You learn how discipline works. You learn how to manage your time. You learn how to solve problems. You learn how to control your emotions. You learn how to become more valuable. A year later, you may still be living in the same city, working in the same environment, and dealing with some of the same challenges, but you won't be the same person. And that's where real transformation begins. People sometimes want their circumstances to change before they're willing to change themselves. But often, the process works in reverse. You become more valuable, and eventually you attract better opportunities. You become more disciplined, and eventually you produce better results. You become more knowledgeable, and eventually you make better decisions. You improve your communication, and eventually your relationships improve. You strengthen your thinking, and eventually your life begins reflecting that stronger thinking. Your mind is an investment, and unlike many investments, nobody can take away what you truly learn. Money can disappear. Possessions can break. Circumstances can change. But knowledge, wisdom, experience, and developed judgment stay with you and continue producing value. That's why you should never complain about the time it takes to learn. The time is going to pass anyway. The question is, who will you be when it passes? Will you be the same person with the same excuses, the same habits, the same reactions, and the same limited thinking? Or will you have spent those months becoming more capable? And be careful about the people you allow to speak into your life. Not everyone who has an opinion deserves influence. Someone can be confident and still be wrong. Someone can be loud and still have nothing valuable to teach you. Someone can criticize your dreams simply because they stop pursuing their own. So listen carefully, but choose wisely. Find people who challenge you to grow. Find people who encourage discipline rather than excuses. Find people who tell you the truth when you need to hear it. Find teachers who have experience in the areas where you want to improve. And remember, sometimes the right influence isn't a person standing in front of you. Sometimes it's a book. Sometimes it's a lesson. Sometimes it's a difficult experience. Sometimes it's a quiet hour where you finally sit down and think. Give yourself time to think, because consuming information is not the same as developing wisdom. You can read 100 books and change nothing. You can listen to 1,000 motivational speeches and remain exactly where you are. The value of knowledge comes when knowledge changes behavior. Learn something, then use it. Ride something, then apply it. Hear an idea, then test it. If it works, keep it. If it doesn't, learn from it. That's how your mind becomes stronger. And perhaps the most important thing you can do is become your own mental gatekeeper. Before you allow an idea into your mind, ask yourself, is this making me stronger or weaker? Is this helping me think better or making me more distracted? Is this teaching me something useful or simply consuming my attention? Your attention is valuable. Your thoughts are valuable. Your future is valuable. Don't hand them over carelessly. Because what you repeatedly put into your mind eventually becomes what comes out of your life. So choose your influences. Choose your books. Choose your conversations. Choose your questions. Choose your thoughts. Feed your mind with ideas that make you wiser, stronger, and more capable. Guard your mind carefully, because the life you build will always reflect what you feed it. Now, there comes a point where learning has to become doing, because you can fill your mind with wonderful ideas. You can read the books, listen to the lessons, take the notes, write down the goals, and still wake up 6 months later with the same results. Why? Because knowledge by itself doesn't change a life. Applied knowledge does. You can know what you should do and still not do it. You can know that you should save money and still spend it. You can know that you should exercise and still stay on the couch. You can know that you should make the phone call and still postpone it. You can know that you should stop making excuses and still find another one tomorrow morning. And that's where discipline enters the picture. Discipline is the bridge between what you know and what you actually accomplish. Now, people sometimes think discipline means living a miserable life. They imagine discipline as restriction, sacrifice, and constantly telling yourself no. But real discipline is not about making your life smaller. It's about making your future bigger. When you say no to something that is pulling you away from your goal, you're not losing freedom. You're protecting it. When you get up early instead of sleeping another hour, you're not punishing yourself. You're investing in yourself. When you save instead of spending everything, you're not depriving yourself. You're buying future options. When you study instead of wasting another evening, you're not missing life. You're preparing for a better one. That's the difference between temporary pleasure and lasting progress. And here's what you have to understand. Motivation will not always be there. Some mornings you'll wake up inspired. You'll feel powerful. You'll feel like changing everything. You'll make a list. Set your goals, clean your desk, and tell yourself, this is it. From now on, everything changes, and that's wonderful. But then Wednesday comes, you're tired, something goes wrong, someone irritates you, the weather is bad, you don't feel like working. Your enthusiasm disappears. What happens then? That's when discipline has to take over. You don't need to feel motivated to do what matters. You need to have decided. That's a completely different approach to life. If you only work when you feel like working, you'll become a prisoner of your emotions. If you only exercise when you're motivated, your fitness will always depend on your mood. If you only study when you're inspired, your knowledge will grow very slowly. But when you've developed discipline, your feelings don't get the final vote. You say, I may not feel like doing this, but I've decided this is important. And then you do it. That's how self-respect grows. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you strengthen your confidence in yourself. Think about that. Confidence isn't only something you think. It's something you build through evidence. If you repeatedly tell yourself you're going to wake up early, and then you don't, your mind notices. If you repeatedly say you're going to exercise, and then you quit after 3 days, your mind notices. If you say you're going to finish something and repeatedly leave it unfinished, your mind notices. But the opposite is also true. When you say, I'm going to do this, and then you do it, you create evidence that you can trust yourself. One promise, then another, and eventually you become the kind of person who doesn't need to make 10 announcements about what they're going to do. They simply do it. That's powerful. And don't underestimate small disciplines. You don't have to completely transform your life in 1 week. Start with the simple things. Make your bed. Keep your schedule. Finish what you start. Write a few pages. Exercise consistently. Save a little money. Arrive on time. Keep your word. Turn off the distractions when it's time to work. These things may look insignificant, but they're teaching you something much bigger. You're teaching yourself that your decisions matter. And once you understand that, discipline stops feeling like punishment. It becomes identity. You begin saying, I'm a person who follows through. I'm a person who does what I said I would do. I'm a person who can delay pleasure for something more important. I'm a person who doesn't quit simply because something becomes uncomfortable. Now, that's a different kind of mindset, And discomfort is actually part of the process. There will be moments when growth feels uncomfortable. There will be days when you doubt yourself. There will be times when progress seems painfully slow, but don't confuse discomfort with failure. Sometimes discomfort is simply the price of becoming stronger. A muscle grows because it is challenged. Character grows the same way. Patience grows when you're forced to wait. Courage grows when you act despite fear. Discipline grows when you do what needs to be done despite resistance. So don't run from every difficult feeling. Ask yourself what the difficulty is trying to develop in you. And remember, discipline doesn't mean doing everything. It means doing the right things consistently. That's important. You don't need a schedule filled with 100 tasks. You need a few meaningful priorities and the discipline to honor them. Focus your energy. Decide what matters, then build your days around it. Because your future isn't created by what you occasionally do when you're excited. It's created by what you repeatedly do when nobody is watching. The world sees the result, but you know the routine that created it. You know the mornings you got up. You know the distractions you resisted. You know the work you finished when you didn't feel like finishing it. You know the days you kept going. And one day, those small decisions become something visible. The skill is there. The savings are there. The strength is there. The confidence is there. The opportunity appears and you're ready for it. That's what discipline does. It prepares you for the life your mindset has already imagined. So don't wait for motivation to rescue you. Build habits that carry you when motivation disappears. Think better. Choose better. Then act consistently. Your mindset sets the direction, but discipline takes you there. Now, when you begin controlling your thoughts, taking responsibility, feeding your mind with better ideas, and developing the discipline to act, something else begins to change. You start asking different questions. And that may sound like a small thing, but it isn't. The questions you ask yourself can determine the direction your mind takes. Because your mind is always searching for answers. Give it a question, and it starts looking. If you constantly ask, why does this always happen to me? Your mind will search for evidence that life is unfair. If you ask, what can I learn from this? Your mind starts searching for a lesson. If you ask, why am I so unlucky? You'll find reasons to feel unlucky, but ask, what can I do with what I have? And suddenly you're looking for possibilities, same circumstances, different question, different direction. That's why you have to become careful with the questions you repeat in your own mind. Some people spend years asking questions that make them weaker. Why don't people appreciate me? Why isn't my life easier? Why didn't I get the opportunity? Why does everybody else seem to have more? And I'm not saying those questions are never understandable. Sometimes you're disappointed. Sometimes you're frustrated. Sometimes you need to acknowledge what happened, but don't build your home there. You cannot move forward while constantly staring backward. At some point, you've got to ask, what now? What now? That might be one of the most powerful questions you can learn to ask. What now? The business failed. What now? The relationship ended. What now? The opportunity disappeared. What now? You made a mistake. What now? You lost money. What now? You didn't get the result you wanted. What now? That question doesn't deny the problem. It acknowledges the problem and then turns your attention toward possibility. And that's what strong thinking does. It doesn't waste all of its energy trying to change what cannot be changed. It looks for the next useful action. Maybe the answer is to learn a new skill. Maybe it's to apologize. Maybe it's to save more money. Maybe it's to improve your health. Maybe it's to make 10 more calls. Maybe it's to read another book. Maybe it's to start again. But there is almost always something you can do. And sometimes the answer is hidden inside a better question. Instead of asking, how can I become successful? Ask, how can I become more valuable? That's a better question, because when you become more valuable, you create more opportunities. Instead of asking, how can I make more money? Ask, what problems can I learn to solve? Instead of asking, how can I get people to respect me? Ask, how can I become a person worthy of respect? Instead of asking, how can I get motivated? Ask, what system can help me act even when motivation disappears? Instead of asking, how can I avoid failure? Ask, how can I make failure useful? Do you see the difference? The first question often looks for something outside of you. The second question looks for something you can develop within yourself, and that puts you back in control. Now, there's another powerful question. What am I not seeing? That's a question worth asking when you're frustrated. Maybe you're convinced that there's only one way forward. Maybe you're staring at the problem so long that you've forgotten to look for alternatives. What am I not seeing? Maybe there's another approach. Maybe there's another person you can ask. Maybe there's another skill you can develop. Maybe there's an opportunity hidden inside the obstacle. Maybe the answer isn't to work harder at the same thing. Maybe it's to work differently. You won't always know the answer immediately. That's okay. A good question doesn't always give you an instant answer. Sometimes it starts a process. You ask it today. You think about it tomorrow. You read something. You talk to someone. You observe. You experiment. And eventually an answer begins to form. That's how wisdom develops. Not because you magically know everything, but because you become better at asking questions and learning from the answers. And don't forget to ask yourself questions when things are going well. People often only examine their lives when something goes wrong, but success deserves reflection too. What is working? What habits are producing these results? What should I continue? What can I improve? What did I learn? Because when you understand why something is working, you can repeat it. That's how progress becomes sustainable. You don't just chase results. You study the process that created them. And perhaps one of the most important questions you can ask is, who do I need to become? Not, what do I need to get? Who do I need to become? If you want better relationships, perhaps you need to become a better listener. If you want financial stability, perhaps you need to become more disciplined with money. If you want greater confidence, perhaps you need to become someone who keeps promises to yourself. If you want better opportunities, perhaps you need to become more skilled. If you want more peace, perhaps you need to become better at controlling your reactions. The question shifts from getting to becoming, and that's a powerful shift because when you become better, your ability to handle life becomes better. You stop waiting for the perfect opportunity and start preparing yourself for opportunity. You stop asking life to give you more and start asking yourself how you can become more. That's the mindset that changes a person's direction. So the next time something doesn't go your way, pause before you react. Don't immediately ask, why me? Ask, what can I learn? Don't ask, why can't I? Ask, what do I need to learn? Don't ask, when will things change? Ask, what can I change today? And don't ask only, what do I want? Ask the deeper question, who must I become to handle what I want? Because better questions create better thinking creates better decisions, and better decisions create better lives. Challenge the questions you ask, and you'll change the answers your life can become. And that brings us to the final question. Perhaps the most important question of all, who are you becoming? Because eventually you discover that life isn't simply about getting more. It's about becoming more. You can want more money, but if you don't become wiser with money, more money may only create bigger problems. You can want greater success, but if you don't develop the discipline to handle responsibility, success can become overwhelming. You can want better relationships, but if you don't become a better communicator, a better listener, and a better person, you may continue creating the same problems with different people. So the real question isn't simply, what do I want? The real question is, who do I need to become? That's where the whole journey comes together. You began by changing your thinking. Then you learned to take responsibility. You started feeding your mind with better ideas. You developed discipline. You learned to ask better questions. And now all of those things are shaping you. That's the real reward. Not just the money, not just the recognition, not just the achievement. You become the person who can walk into a difficult situation and remain calm. You become the person who can hear criticism without falling apart. You become the person who can experience failure without deciding that you're finished. You become the person who can receive an opportunity without being destroyed by the responsibility that comes with it. That's growth. And growth is often quieter than people expect. You don't always wake up one morning and suddenly feel like a completely different person. Sometimes you notice it in little moments. You respond differently than you used to. You don't lose your temper as quickly. You don't spend money as carelessly. You don't waste as much time. You don't need everyone's approval. You don't make excuses as easily. You finish what you start. You think before you speak. You choose your friends more carefully. You read instead of scrolling. You work when you don't feel like working. And one day you look back and realize, I'm not the person I used to be. That's transformation. And here's something beautiful about becoming more. Nobody can do it for you. People can encourage you. Teachers can guide you. Books can teach you. Friends can support you. But nobody can develop your character in your place. Nobody can discipline you for you. Nobody can think for you. Nobody can make your decisions for you. At some point, you have to decide, I'm going to take ownership of who I become. And that decision can change the trajectory of your entire life. Now, don't make the mistake of thinking you need to become perfect. You don't. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have bad days. You're going to lose your patience. You're going to make decisions you wish you could take back. You're going to have moments when you fall short of your own standards. That's part of becoming. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is progress. Become a little wiser, a little stronger, a little more disciplined, a little more patient, a little more courageous, a little more useful, a little more responsible, and let those small improvements compound. You see, a better life is often the result of becoming a better person one decision at a time. You don't need to know everything today. You just need to be willing to learn. You don't need to have everything figured out. You just need to take the next responsible step. You don't need to feel fearless. You just need enough courage to move while you're still afraid. And don't compare your becoming to somebody else's finished-looking picture. You don't know their whole story. You don't know their struggles. You don't know how long they've been working. You don't know what sacrifices they made. Your job is not to become somebody else. Your job is to become the strongest, wisest, most capable version of yourself. That's where real confidence comes from, not from pretending you're better than everyone else. From knowing that you're better than you used to be. And when you become more capable, your opportunities change. You notice things you couldn't see before. You handle situations you couldn't handle before. You attract people you couldn't relate to before. You can walk into rooms with greater confidence because you've earned that confidence through preparation. That's why personal development isn't something you finish. There isn't a magical day when you can say, I've learned enough. I've grown enough. I don't need to improve anymore. Life keeps presenting new challenges, and every new level requires a new version of you. The person who got you here may not be the person who can take you there. So keep growing, keep learning, keep adjusting, keep asking better questions, keep challenging your old assumptions, keep your standards high, but keep your heart humble. And remember this, the life you want may require a version of you that doesn't exist yet. That's not bad news. That's the opportunity. You get to build that person. Every book you read contributes something. Every disciplined decision contributes something. Every difficult conversation handled with maturity contributes something. Every mistake you learn from contributes something. Every time you choose responsibility over excuses, you contribute something brick by brick, decision by decision, habit by habit. You're building yourself, and eventually, the life you've been trying to reach begins to look less impossible because you've become more capable of creating it. So don't just chase a better life. Build a better you. Don't just ask what you can achieve. Ask what you can become. Don't just dream about the future. Develop the person who can live that future wisely, because when you become more, you can do more. When you can do more, you can create more. And when you create more value, you create more possibilities for your life and for the people around you. That's the real power of mindset. It doesn't magically change the world around you. It changes the person walking through that world. And when that person changes, everything that person touches has the possibility of changing too. Become better. And your life will have no choice but to become better with you.